Welcome to Organized Chaos, the podcast dedicated to helping seven-figure companies grow to nine-figure ones by turning HR into rocket fuel for their growth. I'm your host, Nahat Kairala, and I've been helping companies do just that for more than a decade. In each episode, I'll dive into HR topics that have a significant impact on your company's growth and leave you with actionable advice that will help your business reach its full potential. Let's dive right in and start organizing all that HR chaos. Hello and welcome back to the show. Before I get started, I'd like to wish you a happy new year and thank you for being a member of the Organized Chaos community. Our listener base has been steadily increasing since launching the first episode on August 1st of this year. So thank you again for your continued support. If you haven't done so already, please follow the podcast to get notified whenever I release new episodes. So this is episode 11, and today I am going to deep dive into the hiring process. When you're a growing startup, hiring is one of the most important things you can do because your company's success depends on it. It's one of the core HR capabilities that I think a startup should have in order to be successful. You can tune into episode 3 for a full rundown of these capabilities. You can have the best product or service in the world, but without the right people, your chances of survival shrink dramatically. If your startup has found success and you're ready to go into growth mode, then scale, hiring becomes a critical function within your organization. Early on, startups need A players in every single position because they cannot afford not to. The hard truth is that A players significantly outperform average employees. A 2017 study by McKinsey found that high performers are 400% more productive than average ones. This productivity gap increases with job complexity, particularly in roles requiring high levels of information and interaction. In highly complex jobs, such as those involving management or software development, A players can be up to 800% more productive than their average counterparts. Imagine that. A single A player can be as productive as 8 average employees. It's mind-blowing, but at the same time, it just goes to show you how important it is to hire the best talent you can find. But the sad truth is that the way we do hiring is fundamentally flawed. I'll go a step further and say that I think hiring is not only flawed, but completely broken. I say this because when you think about it, hiring is somewhat of a haphazard process at many companies, startups, and enterprises alike. From the way a job is opened to how interviewers are selected and how interviews are conducted, the whole process is a mess more times than not, and it requires a massive overhaul. Before I dive into the specifics of why I think hiring is broken and my recommendations for fixing it, I'd like to pour some more salt on this wound by sharing additional statistics on how bad hiring takes a toll on your company. In a survey by CareerBuilder of 2,000 hiring managers, 74% reported hiring the wrong person for a position at least once, and 41% said a bad hire had cost them over $25,000. A study by Harvard Business Review found that 80% of employee turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. In a survey by Robert Half of 1,000 employees, 39% said they would consider quitting if their manager hired a bad fit for the team. So what exactly is wrong with recruitment and how do we fix it? There are 10 things I can think of, and here they are. Number 1, deciding when it's the right time to hire. Most companies don't know how to do this and simply use intuition to decide when a position needs to be filled. How many times have you hired more people because you and your managers thought that there was too much work to go around? How many times have your managers come to you with doomsday scenarios where the only solution was to make a few additional hires? If you've been listening to the show for the past few months, then you know how I feel about this. I've said it many times before and I'll say it again. Hiring more people should never be your first reaction to employees complaining about a lot of work or if deadlines are being missed. If you want to hear about why that's a problem, then check out episode 4 where I discuss the do's and don'ts of scaling. The most important thing you can do is understand your entire operation, your processes, and the capacity required to deliver output that provides value to your customers. Many companies fall into the trap of drowning themselves in busy work that doesn't help you achieve your goals and doesn't impact your revenue growth in any way. Let me repeat. You need to understand your entire operation, your processes, and the capacity required to deliver output that provides value to customers. Those are the activities that help you generate revenue. Before you approve any new hires, make sure to map out the work your company does, including all processes, then map each existing employee to this work. In other words, you need to understand the work that needs to be done and who is currently doing it. More so, you need to understand how much work each employee can handle while accounting for human inefficiencies along the way. Try to get capacity metrics on output to help you determine if you have over or underutilized resources. For example, track the time it takes to design a product, fix a bug, or answer a customer service ticket. Over time, you will build a fairly accurate understanding of your company's capacity, which will in turn allow you to make a more informed decision on when you need to hire more people. As an early stage startup, only hire people who will be doing value added work that has a significant impact on your company and your customers. Any other type of work should be dropped, postponed, or automated. With this level of information, you will be able to make clear decisions on when it's time to hire, and you will have the information you need to greenlight or block a hiring request. Number 2, failing to build a solid business case for the new role. How many times have you seen a hiring manager change a job description, modify the candidate profile, or switch up interviewers after the hiring process has already started? I know I've seen it way more times than I can count. These are things I see a lot in companies that are never super clear on why a role exists and how it integrates into the organization. There's a misconception that writing a job description is all you need to justify a new role and find the best candidate for the job. A job description is important, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. You need to ask yourself questions like, why does this position exist? What value does it bring to the company? What don't we do today that this role will help us do? What is the impact on the business if we don't fill this role? If you can't answer one or more of these questions, then you're not ready to start the hiring process. I'll go a step further and say that you shouldn't make any hires if you can't answer these questions, because that means you clearly don't know what this new role will be doing and why it's important to fill it. And the problem is that you'll end up with a new hire who is either not a fit for what you need, is floating around with no real purpose, doesn't have enough work to do, or becomes a dumping ground for work that no one on the team wants to do. The best way to solidify the purpose of this new hire is to identify all the key stakeholders who will interact with this job role. I always recommend making this process collaborative and working with stakeholders to define the scope of this new role. Doing so will allow you to identify any gaps, potential duplication and overlap of efforts, and any other blind spots you are not privy to. I also recommend that you evaluate the impact of this role on existing operations. Clearly define how this new role will fit into the current construct of the business. Are there any changes that are needed in terms of org structure, processes, and so forth to ensure this role is successful? All of these things are important considerations to take into account before you launch the hiring process. Number 3, not aligning with stakeholders on the ideal candidate profile. It's no secret that companies hire employees based on a combination of experience, education, skills, character, and organizational culture fit. The problem is that many companies don't take the time to align on the ideal candidate profile before they start the hiring process and the interviews. What you end up with is a messy evaluation process where every interviewer is using their own subjective criteria for evaluating candidates. Even clear scorecards and rating scales cannot save you without a crystal clear alignment on the ideal candidate profile. I was recently dealing with an interviewer who rated a candidate very poorly. I reached out to discuss their feedback because it wasn't clear to me why they rated the candidate so poorly. It turned out that the interviewer didn't think that the candidate knew enough about the company's industry to be effective in the role, although the role itself didn't require industry knowledge to be successful. This was no fault of the interviewer because the company had a history of only hiring people from their industry. It was never made clear to him that this was not a factor he should consider in his evaluation. To avoid situations like this, work with the main stakeholders for the job and come out with a clear list of criteria that defines the ideal candidate. I recommend that you refrain from starting the hiring process until this is done. If you don't do this, each interviewer will use their own evaluation criteria, and your chances of ending up with a bad hire significantly go up. Number 4, using an unstructured interview process. For your hiring process to be effective, it needs to be consistent from start to finish every single time. This applies to the number of interviews in your process as well as the types of questions you ask during interviews. Although this seems logical, there's a small percentage of companies that actually use a structured interview process. The problem with an unstructured process is that you are not applying the same evaluation mechanisms to all candidates. So you're not comparing apples to apples. If you're hiring software engineers and one time you do 3 interviews and the next time you do 5 interviews, then there needs to be a clear reason for it. Otherwise, you're just showing candidates and your employees that you have no clue what you're doing. The biggest issue with unstructured interviews is the questions that interviewers ask. How many times have you gone through a hiring process and felt that several of the interviews were similar because the questions were relatively the same? How many times have you interviewed with someone who you felt didn't know enough about the job or seemed like they were winging it with questions based on what came to their mind at the time? How many times have you been asked questions that have nothing to do with your ability to do the job? These are all signs of an unstructured interview process. Every interview in your process must have a clearly defined purpose. If it doesn't, then you need to question why it exists. There's no point in wasting your team and the candidate's time with interviews that add no value to the decision-making process. The reason why the number of interviews sometimes gets out of control is because we want to involve as many people as possible, thinking that more opinions will result in a better hire. Resist the urge to do that because the number of people giving feedback is irrelevant. As long as you're evaluating everything you need to, you'll be fine. For example, your interview process might have 3 different stages. The first interview is a technical evaluation, the second interview is a leadership competency evaluation, and the third interview is a culture fit evaluation. When it comes to interview questions, each interviewer should prepare a set of questions that they ask each candidate. Again, you want to make sure that you are comparing apples to apples. If you ask candidates completely different questions, then you're not evaluating based on the same criteria. This doesn't mean that you can't ask questions that are not on your list, especially if you want to probe deeper into a topic based on the answers you hear. The point is that your main evaluation should be based on a standardized set of questions for all candidates. The assumption here is that your main questions cover the areas which are evaluated for each candidate. Number 5. Involving interviewers that add no value to the hiring outcome. Sometimes it feels like companies treat interviewing like a block party. Anyone who wishes to participate is invited. Interviewers should be handpicked based on the job role you are trying to fill. Every interviewer should bring something to the table when it comes to evaluating candidates, and they need to have a very strong understanding of the role. During the pandemic, I witnessed 2 hiring processes that blew my mind away. The first one was at a healthcare organization, one of the largest on the East Coast. They were hiring for a VP level role and ran candidates through 5 interview stages and a psychometric test. 4 of the 5 interviews were with a panel of 3 interviewers. So candidates who made it to the end spoke to 13 people in total, which is mind-blowing. I attended all the interviews and they all sounded very similar. There was very little differentiation between them. I couldn't understand the logic behind the number of interviewers, but it turned out that it was the result of a culture that operated on consensus by committee. They needed all these people to weigh in before a hire was made. The second one was at one of the fintech unicorns out of Silicon Valley. This company was also hiring for a senior leadership position, and they ran candidates through 6 to 9 interviews and a work sample project. The number of interviews was being determined on the fly because the team kept feeling like they needed an additional person's opinion. The interview that blew my mind was the culture fit interview. The interviewer was a senior software engineer who had been at the company for 3 years. So this fintech unicorn startup appointed a software engineer with no leadership experience to conduct a culture fit evaluation for a role he did not know much about and one that he won't interact with outside of company get-togethers. These are examples of how not to do interviewing. Every interviewer has to have a clear purpose and the right skills and experience to objectively evaluate candidates against the job requirements and candidate profile. Number 6, failing to document interview feedback. Nothing irks me more than interviewers who don't take the time to document their feedback after an interview's over. Interviewers who simply give one-liners and vague, generic commentary as feedback are a problem and should not be interviewing anyone before they receive proper training on how to do so effectively. Failing to document interview feedback is a problem on many levels. First, it makes it difficult to evaluate input from all your interviewers, and you end up playing a game of telephone when trying to consolidate the feedback. Documented feedback makes it easy to understand the logic behind an interviewer's decision and allows you to have a constructive discussion about the candidates. A lack of interview feedback documentation can also be a legal risk, especially if a candidate claims discrimination or any other type of unfair treatment during the hiring process. When you document interviews and decisions, you are able to detect any potential wrongdoing and correct it quickly. And you can protect your company from predatory candidates who are trying to take advantage of your company. I've encountered a few instances where candidates tried to fabricate discriminatory claims against my employers and customers, but once we presented documentation that proved fair and transparent hiring decisions, they immediately backed off. Number 7, not testing core skills that are required for the job. This one I will never understand. How can anyone hire an employee based on a resume and some interviews without making sure they are capable of performing the job? There are some job roles where testing is common practice, such as finance, programming, and other jobs that require a niche skill set. But what about hiring for a project manager, or a head of HR, or a marketing specialist? Interviews are not enough, and you will never be able to accurately predict if someone can do the job without testing their capabilities first. There's a lot of value in testing behavioral competencies using assessments, but you need to see if they can do the job well. I recommend giving finalists a small project to complete and compensate them for it. For example, you might ask a UX designer to design some screens for your app, or ask a marketing manager to prepare a marketing plan for one of your products. Give candidates a reasonable amount of time because they're most likely already working and will have to complete the project after working hours. The project has to be representative of the actual work that the hired individual will see on the job. There's no point in asking them to solve riddles and hypothetical problems that they will never encounter on the job. One of the best indicators of a candidate's potential success is their ability to do the work. And a relevant assignment will make it very clear whether they can do the work or not. Number 8, not being honest about the job expectations and the overall experience. There's nothing that ticks me off like an employer who is being dishonest about the job they're filling. Just like me, I'm sure you've all had experiences where the employer sugarcoated the job, made it sound like a dream opportunity filled with sunshine and rainbows, and sold you on an amazing company culture, only for you to find out that it was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. I don't get why companies do this. Do they think that the best way to retain good employees is by simply lying to their faces? Anyways, I think transparency is your best path to finding the right person for the job. During my days as a recruiter, I tell candidates the good, the bad, and the ugly. This applies to the job, company, manager, and teammates. Yes, some candidates bowed out after the first interview, but isn't that the dream scenario? Why would I want to hang on to candidates who clearly do not want to be in our working environment? The funny thing is that candidates are so used to employers hiding stuff about their job openings that they find this transparent approach quite refreshing. It builds trust in your organization and leaves candidates with a clear idea of what they could be walking into should they receive a job offer down the line. Being fully transparent about the job and company also ensures that hired candidates are not shocked during their onboarding period. 20 to 30% of employees leave their jobs within the first 90 days, and it's mostly because of role misalignment or a company culture mismatch, things that can be avoided when employers are more transparent during the hiring process. Number 9, waiting until the job offer stage to reveal compensation. This one is self-explanatory. Many companies still do not reveal nor discuss compensation until the job offer stage. The problem with that is you might drag a candidate along the entire hiring process only to find out that their compensation target is way above your budget. I've always been an advocate of sharing compensation ranges in job postings or during the first interview at the latest. The main benefits of this is that you'll automatically weed out any candidates who are outside your budget. On the flip side, there is a chance you'll open up the application floodgates if your compensation package is competitive. But that's a good problem to have, and there are a lot of ways you can quickly screen out irrelevant candidates. Note that there are a lot of states in the US that have passed pay transparency laws that require employers to post their salary ranges in all job advertisements. Now, if you do that, please do not use absurd salary ranges that make no sense. I sometimes see salary ranges such as $150K to $300K, which is not reasonable, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it's a bogus salary range. So be honest about your salary ranges to avoid misleading candidates and leaving a sour taste in their mouth later in the process. Number 10, cutting corners due to urgency. This is another one that rubs me the wrong way. There's nothing worse than deliberately cutting corners to fast-track candidates just because you and your managers are in a hurry to fill some jobs. There's a reason why your hiring process exists and is structured the way it is. If you've listened up to this point, you know by now that there are many things that can go wrong when you're not consistent with your hiring process. All candidates must go through the same process. It doesn't matter if they are a referral, an online candidate, or your best friend from high school. Make no exceptions. If hiring managers come to you asking to fast-track a candidate, simply point them back to your hiring process and remind them why it exists and explain the potential issues that could arise from cutting corners. Don't fall victim to the exaggerated sense of urgency that some hiring managers try to sell you on. Doing so is a recipe for disaster because it will eventually lead to overhiring and grant you a one-way ticket to layoffs in the not-so-distant future. And that's all I have for you this episode. In the next episode, I'll talk about how you can quickly identify candidates who are a bad fit for the startup world. I wish you all a happy new year, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review wherever you get your podcasts. This will help me spread the word about organized chaos and keep the show going. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to suggest for the show, please send me an email to hello@organizedchaos.fyi. For more content and resources, make sure to check out the website at organizedchaos.fyi. See you on the next one.